Hi, hello everyone. My name is Vivek. I am a software developer. I make videos about containers, Kubernetes, Go as a programming language, distributed systems, and sometimes about software engineering in general. So, if you have been liking the kinds of videos that I make, you should consider subscribing to the channel and you should follow me on Twitter as well. In this particular video, we are going to look into how we can get group version and resource information or details about a specified resource. So we have already talked a lot about what are kinds, what are resources in Kubernetes. If you are not very sure about those things, I highly recommend watching other videos. But in this particular video, we are just going to focus into, let's say we have a resource and we want to get respective group version and resource for that particular resource. Now, if we talk about use cases, why in which particular situations we would want to do that. So let's say you are writing an application that has a resource as string. So in this particular case, let's say we have this resource, and we don't exactly know which particular resource this is. We just know that we have resource stored in a string variable, let's say, and we want to get all the resources of that type that are there in the cluster. So if the value of resource is pods, in that case we want to get all the pods from the system. If value of resource is services, in that case we want to get all the services from the system. So if you see here, since we do not exactly know which particular resource we are dealing with, we will have to use dynamic client. And to actually use dynamic client, we will have to first get group version and resource for this particular resource. Again, if you do not know what dynamic client is, I already have a video on dynamic clients, so you should check that out. So again, let's say you want to interact with a specific type of resource, and like I said, this can be any of the resource that are supported by Kubernetes cluster. Uh, and in that case, you would want to use dynamic client again because you don't know exact type of the resource you are dealing with. And to use dynamic client, you should have or you must have group version and resource information for the particular resource that you are trying to deal with. So this is what we are going to look into today. So you have a particular resource, and how do you get group version resource for the specified resource? Or this can happen anywhere. You are writing an application, let's say that is doing something like this, or you are writing a command line utility. So for example, when we use kubectl create role and we specify hyphen hyphen resources to be, let's say, pods and services. So those pods and services are actually converted into exact group version and resource before the respective Kubernetes resources or object is created. So this is what we are going to look into. Now, if you remember again, one of my previous videos, we very specifically said that once we have a particular resource, we can use RestMapper interface to actually get the group version resource information. And if we look into uh, this particular interface or this particular type that we have here, this is the type that can be used to get group version and resource information. So if you see here, resource for method actually takes partial resource. Partial resource simply means that you don't necessarily have to specify all the information about the resource. For example, you don't have to specify group version and resource. You can just specify resource, and this is going to get us complete group version and resource. So in our case, if we just specify service, resource for is going to get us the complete information about that resource, and this is the partial information about that resource because we are not specifying group and version. Again, you should at least by now know that the resources are part of group and version. I have already talked about that. That is the reason I'm just using those words and not explaining them. So somehow what we should do is somehow we should get an instance or type that implements this particular interface, and then we can call this resource for method on that type, passing the partial resource, and then we are going to get the exact or complete group poison resource type, let's say, or details. So to get the implementation of this RestMapper interface, if you see here in the generic CLI options package, we have REST client getter, and again this is an interface, and if a type implements this interface, we can call to RestMapper on that type to get the actual RestMapper interface that we see here. And once we got the RestMapper, so meta.RestMapper is the type that we are looking at right now. So we will call to RestMapper on the type that implements REST client getter. And once we got meta.RestMapper, we can very easily call ResourceFor. So now to actually get the REST client getter, we are going to use this particular config, or this particular struct. So if you see here, it simply says that config flags composes the set of values necessary to obtaining a REST client config, and this is exactly what we want to do. So let's go ahead and try to write the code. All I have done is I have just created this directory, and I have opened that in code. The other thing that I want to do is I already have a Kubernetes cluster that is set up using kind. Let's create a Go project. Let's initialize a Go project, and the module is going to be, and this should create the go.mod file. Now let's go ahead and try to create a main.go file. Okay, so now that we have main.go file, what we can do is, like any other Go program, we are going to have a main func. Again, we are not going to very much focus on the Go program itself, but the mechanism how we are going to get the REST mapper and then call resource for. So we know that we want to get an instance of this type, and we see that we have this method that can get us uh, an instance of this particular type. So let's first import this, and then we are going to call generic CLI options dot new config flags, and this gets us config flags. So we are going to call true, and then we are going to call another builder, we can say, I think, that gets us. So that gets us, this just sets the username and password to be empty. So I mean, we don't have to worry about that. If you see here, this particular function returns config flags, and this function also returns config flags, but it just sets some of the values here to empty, because we don't want to use those values. We can look into the implementation in just a bit, but let's for now just call this. So dot, and now we have a config flag instance. So let's call it config flag, and let's go ahead and try to just build this project. So go mod tidy, it is going to download the respective dependencies, and then okay, so config flag is declared but not used. That's not a problem. Once we have config flag, what we can do is from the cmd/util package, we can call new match version flags that gets us match version flags, and then we can call new factory to get the factory. And if we look into this particular interface, it has REST client getter embedded. And then because we know that REST client getter actually has two REST mapper, we would be able to call two REST mapper with the type that implements the factory. So let's go ahead and try to call new match version flags from cmd util package. So let's import cmd util dot new match version flags, and it expects a REST client getter, so we can pass config flag here and dot match version flags. And when we get match version flags, we can call I'm just going to print these things to avoid these problems. So match version flags, and if I go mod ID again, okay. So now that we have match version flags, what we are going to do is we are going to call new factory. And we have already seen, this factory has generic CLI options, and using that generic CLI options we can call to REST mapper to actually get meta.rest mapper, and that is from API machinery. So let's go ahead and try to do that. So cmd util dot new factory, and this is going to expect match version flags dot to REST mapper, and this is going to get us mapper and error. So if error is not equals to nil, in that case we are just going to print the error. So getting REST mapper from new factory, and this is the error, and return. If we have the mapper successfully, again this two REST mapper gets us meta.rest mapper, and this is the REST mapper that we talked about in one of the previous videos. So I have a playlist on client go, and there in one specific video we looked into the API machinery in a lot more detail, I would say. So this REST mapper is from API machinery. If you say here, if you see here, so once we have REST mapper, we can obviously call the source for. So we have mapper. Now let's go ahead and call m.resourceFor, and this is going to get us GVR. And does this return error? If error is not equals to nil, in that case we are going to just print it, getting GVR for resource, and the error is this. And m.resourceFor actually expects a partial resource. If you see here, takes a partial resource, and what we can do is we can specify a resource. So resource colon equals to pods, and then we can pass that resource to ResourceFor. If you see here, ResourceFor actually takes schema.group version resource, and there we can pass the resource to the resource. And once we have the GVR, the let's say complete GVR, let's go ahead and try to print that. So println or printf complete GVR is group %s version %s and resource %s, and GVR dot group GVR dot version and GVR dot resource. Now that we have a very basic skeleton setup here, let's just do one more change here. Instead of hard coding pods, let's go ahead and try to take it from user. So we are going to use flag package dot string var, and we are going to store that input in a variable of type string. Name is going to be resource and value is going to be empty by default, and usage is resource name, let's say, or resource that you want to interact with, and flag dot pass, and we can pass the resource to GVR now. Okay, so we are in a good state now. Let's go ahead and try to build this. So go build, and as soon as we get the output or get the binary, we can just call it with a particular resource to figure out or to get the complete GVR. So dot slash RestMapper, and then let's pass pods. So if you see here, we just passed pods, but the output that we got is version v1 resource pods and group is empty because pods are from core group. That is the reason we don't see group here, but we do see version. Now let's use any other resource that has group and version as well. So let's list all the uh, let's list all the API resources, and let's try to pass, let's say, storage classes. And if you see here, we called RestMapper for storage classes, and we got the exact output that we were expecting. Group is storage.gates.io, version is v1, and resource is storage classes. So this is basically what I wanted to show you in this particular video. And because of certain use cases that we talked about, there are chances that you would want to have complete group version resource for a particular resource. And this is how RestMapper from API machinery can be used to do that. Now, let's see if this works for the custom resources as well. So I'm just going to introduce a custom resource. So apply -f. I have a CRD definition present somewhere. That is what I'm trying to find here. Okay, so I have created a CRD. It will get CRDs, and if I get all the API resources again, I should be able to see the new resource as well. This was not present last time. So if you see here, this was not present earlier. Now, if I go ahead and try to call RestMapper for this new resource that we have just added, so we are correctly able to figure out group version and resource for this newly introduced resource as well. Now, the other thing that I wanted to show you is, let's go ahead and try to delete this resource that we have added. So delete the CRD. This clearly says that the CRD has been deleted. And now if I list all the API resources, we do not see cluster anymore. So we do not see cluster. But if we call RestMapper on cluster resources, we are still able to see so if you see here, as soon as we delete it, we are not able to see the complete detail, and we are able to see the problem, that is getting GVR for resource. This is the call that is failing, and since we are not returning from here, this line is also being printed. Now, the other thing that I wanted to talk about is sometimes there are chances that you would still see the output from RestMapper or this particular call, and that is the reason that is what I was expecting. And the problem is whenever we make that call, so if we look into new config flags, here we specify the cache directory. So whenever this call is made, we store the details. When I say the details, I mean which particular resource belongs to which particular group and version. That details is stored locally, and that is what is specified using cache directory. And the directory by default is, if you look here, .cube and cache. So if you go ahead and try to look into .cube and cache, this is how that detail is stored. So if we go to discovery, and then this is obviously the server name in our cube config file. So if we look into our cube config, this is what, okay, so I should not have done that basically. But yeah, if we look into our current cube config file, you should be able to see, you should be able to see this server there. And if we cd into that, we would be able to see groups. And for example, if we cd into viveksingh.dev, we would be able to see version. And for a specific group and version, we have server resources.json that has all the details. So even if you have deleted the crd, there are chances that you would see the correct output for some time, until and unless you have somehow deleted that. So yeah, I think this is what I wanted to talk about in this particular video. I'm obviously going to push this code base to my GitHub repo and link that in the description. If you have any question about this, don't hesitate to reach out to me, and I'll be more than happy to help you there. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next one.